Let's talk about signal flow. Don't forget to stop by vexpressionsltd.com after the video. Choose your module at the top of the site and you can see all the expansions we have available for you. You'll be able to read news on our latest releases and sign up for our newsletter to be notified of new and upcoming expansion releases. We also have links to our favorite partners as well as a whole page dedicated to our recommended products that we are asked about quite often. At any time, you can choose your module from the drop down at the top of the site and see all the expansions we have available for you. For those of you new to your modules, we have helpful information on the right side, including what requirements you should expect, and links to both our Quick Start video and Quick Start guide. Choose the expansion you're interested in, and it will take you to a page where you can learn more about it, learn how to save money by bundling with other expansions, and listen to expansions as you read the manual, which contains the kit listing and descriptions. For those of you new to VExpressions, we have a dedicated frequently asked questions page where all your questions will be answered before your purchase. If at any time you cannot find the answers to your questions, simply head to the contact page and choose the correct person to contact based on the module you have. So head on over today, get started, and we'll see you soon. Hey guys, Alan from VExpressions here. Today I want to talk about signal flow, or better yet, the question I get asked a million times a week: routing. How do I get this sound here? Why do my direct out sound like that? How do I get that sound that's in my headphones out of my direct out? Why can't I send my snare out the direct out and make it sound exactly like it sounds in my headphones? We're going to answer all that today. So thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching the video. If you like what you see and you get something out of this video, please remember to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and click the bell while you're down there so you get notified of upcoming videos. So I'm going to start out by showing an example in the DAW because it's easier for me to show the signal flow in a DAW than it is to point at the face of a module and say, I'm changing this and it can only go there or it'll go there or whatever. It's a little harder. Plus, I don't want anybody to look at a TD50 and say, oh, this isn't for me. This is going to be for everybody. So the first thing I want to start out with, I'm in Persona Studio 1. That's the DAW of my choice. If you're looking for a DAW, I would say check it out. And if you're on a budget, maybe check out their artist version or their Prime version, which is the free version. They have limitations in those. And also check out Reaper, which is a great DAW as well. I used Reaper for years before I came to this one. I've used just about everything on the market, but this is my favorite as of today. And a lot of people from Pro Tools are moving to this, so I think it's got a bright future, but enough of that. This is a song I worked on last year, and what I'm going to do, I wanted to start with a song to show you what a DAW can do compared to what a module can do, where the limitations are, what you have available to you and what you don't have available to you. That's what this video is going to be about. And we're also going to get into the routing questions that I mentioned before. So let's look at this session here. As you can see, I have a ton of tracks. I have some bass guitar. I have a whole slew of drums here, some guitars, some horns, some keys, lead vocals, some background vocals. And then I have those green channels are my effects that I send stuff to. And then the white channels are my buses. And then I have a mixed bus, a master, and these two don't matter. You're listening to this one here. I'm listening to that one there. None of that matters. So let's get started right away here. Looking at the drums. I look at processing in levels. In the studio, in the DAW, whatever you want to call it, we have basically endless levels of processing. The general level, general layers that you see most people do is about 4, and I'm going to explain those right here. In the module, we only get 2 of those. And then within those processing levels, we also are limited in the module to just EQ and compression. I'm not talking about ambience or effects or any of that at the moment. I'll get to that later. So let me just show you in a typical DAW all the things that we do that add life to a song or to an instrument. So as you can see here, I'm running a tape emulation. This is for saturation on the signal coming in. I'm running a console emulation that's giving me some more warmth. And then I'm running the EQ here and a polish EQ that's adding some air to it. The trimmer is just making up for the volume differences here as I adjust these. Finally, I'm running a compressor and not even using that trimmer there. So in a general module sense, we would only be using this compressor and we'd be using this EQ right here. We would not be using any of this other stuff. So that's all fine and dandy. That's the difference of two worlds. That's a module versus a DAW. We totally understand that. So that's our first level of processing. All these drums get that first level of processing. Again, in the module, that's EQ and compression only. Here, it's, the sky's the limit. But I want to move down to our drum bus, which is where all these are going to, our drum bus. We're going to scroll on down here to this white channel that says drums. And I'm going to show you what's on it. To me, this is where the module ends, except I also have some limitations here as well. So on this channel, on this drum bus, I also have a compressor. I'm actually running some reverb on this bus for a kind of a spacious feel to this song. This is not I'm not getting into the reverb that's on your module yet, but I also have an EQ here as well. The order that you do these is totally up to you. I usually do EQs after compressors because of the color addition, and I want to be able to adjust that afterwards. But that's another story, another video for another time. So basically what I wanted to point out here is I have a compressor and I have an EQ, but I could have so much more on here. As a matter of fact, I do have another parallel compressor right here that you cannot even get in the module at all. You have no parallel compression. Parallel compression, by the way, is compression that kind of runs side. It's parallel. It runs side beside your normal mix of your drums, and it gives you that crushed kind of room feeling. I'm not going to get into all that right now. We'll cover that in other topics where DAWs are concerned. But this is basically, to me, the second level of processing that we would have at the module, minus all that extra fun stuff. We just have a transparent EQ and a transparent compressor. So here's where the DAW takes us to the next level. We have what's called a mix bus. Basically, that is where all our instruments here in white, bass, guitar, horns, drums, keys, lead, and background vocals all come together in what's called a mix bus. In that mix bus, you'll see we also have, in the DAW, I have some more emulations here for the console. But more importantly, now we're on a third compressor. So in a DAW, we do compression in steps, which is what gives us that really clean, nicely crushed, dynamically beautiful result. Whereas in the module, we're forced to do that in only 2 steps. That's what makes a huge difference. And that's why a lot of people say that drum modules start to sound synthetic as opposed to real drums. Of course they do, because you're trying to overdo something. First of all, you're working with samples. But second of all, you don't have all the fun here, the warmth, the saturation, the stuff that you can add in the DAW, and you're crushing it all into 2 levels of processing. So here, as you can see on the mix bus, we're going to usually have a compressor, an EQ, maybe a second EQ for corrective issues, and then maybe more saturation and warmth, depending on who's mixing it and what they like to do. And then beyond that, we have another level of processing. This is the 4th level I was talking about, where you're going to have more saturation, more EQ, a thicker, more colorful compressor, and then a polishing EQ, and maybe some mid-side processing. I know I'm getting a little bit out there, but I'm trying to show you all the stuff that brings a song to fruition that you can't really do in a module. You can only get that by sending that to a front of house engineer that has all this stuff in his arsenal to take it to that level. So that's the main difference and limitation. So let me let you hear this real quick before we jump into the module example. This is what it sounds like to have all this fun stuff on drums. And by the way, this is a live session that was recorded in a studio with a bunch of musicians all at once. There's some bleed you'll hear in the module example. But this is what all that can take. This is what all that type of processing can take it to level-wise. Take a listen. So that's enough. I think you get the idea there. So now let's go over to our module example. So what this is this exact same drum tracks that I just pulled from that other session. And in 10 minutes, I literally threw on default EQs, default compressors. I threw in my just kind of go-to settings. I literally did not mix this. I just went in like on my bass drum. I literally threw in, a punch at 55, and my usually go-tos are 55 to 63, somewhere in there. So you can see I have low end and I have an attack, and then I have a general compressor setting. And I did that pretty much for everything, not the same settings, obviously, but I just did my go-to settings for each of these. So it's going to sound completely different. It is not mixed whatsoever. And I kind of exaggerated the wetness and the ambience so that you can hear when I turn stuff on and off. But basically, what we're looking at here is I have, by the way, all this up here is basically just the tracks. Consider that your performance, live or recorded, does not matter. But I have a kick in, kick out. This would be reminiscent of a mimic or say the layers in a TD50. I have a snare top and a snare bottom, same thing. I have a hi-hat, but this session did not record a ride, so I don't have a ride. I have 3 toms. In most cases, you guys are going to have anywhere between 3 and 4 toms in your module. And I have a couple of overheads. In Roland, that would be on your direct out cymbals left and right. In the mimic, that would be overhead left and right. But basically, this is reminiscent of pretty much any module with the exception of those of you who do not have layers. You would just have 1 bass drum and 1 snare. I will tell you in a moment why I did all these buses. I'll explain all that as we get to it. But down here, I also created an emulation of reverb and room. So in the case of Roland, your reverb, well, reverb is going to be digital processing on any module. But when it comes to the room, in the Mimic, those are real mics. In some of the other modules, at least ATV, I'm not going to get into names. The point being is some modules have actual mics that are the room mics themselves. In the case of Roland, I'm willing to bet $100 that those are actually just DSP. And the reason I say that is because the room send is on your individual instruments, and then when you go into the other section, that's an effect. It's not a real mic. And then finally, we have a master channel here, which is exactly, like I said, this is set up to mimic, no pun intended, your module. So the reason I did these buses here, and what the buses are is basically I have a bass drum in and out, or say the TD50's layers. They come into a bus together. This fader right here is basically the fader on the front of your flagship. For some of you, that mixer may be internal, but in most cases, the flagships have faders available to you immediately so that you can adjust something on the fly. That's mainly going to be just for your mains and your headphone, and that's pretty much it. So I did that for each one of these. So like I said, it's mimicking the front of a module. I see there's my kick fader, which is also my direct out. This is my snare fader on the front. This is hat. I named these direct outs, but they're not really direct outs. I'll explain why I named those direct outs in a moment. And then toms, again, I don't have the ride one, and then I have my overheads or cymbals, and then I also have one for my ambience. So those are buses that your module creates for you instead of me having to create them in a DAW. Your module just kind of routes it to that single bus. And then those all come to basically your master. So I'm going to play this. It's going to sound completely different than what you heard a moment ago. And basically, it's going to be thinner. Well, first of all, I was going for more of a raw recording here because I wanted it to emulate more of what a module does. So the EQs are very straightforward. The compressors are very straightforward. The changes you're going to hear as I cycle these on and off is going to be very minimal, but it will be there enough for you to hear it. And I will explain what the target, result of those things are. But and then I'm going to go into the ambience here in a second. So here's good. This is going to be the result that we're going to in a moment. Take a listen. Okay, so it's similar. It's thinner. It's cut a little bit more. Like I said, I just threw settings in there. But the point being is, it's similar to a module. You should be able to hear, the difference between a real record and what your module can produce. So when it comes to squashing all that processing into things, some of you may look at the stuff I do for V Expressions and go, how did he come up with that? And some of you may look at it and say, man, that compression is really pushed hard. Yeah, I have to do that to make it sound close to those records or those real, releases. So let's go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to turn off my mastering. I'm going to pump this up a little bit because with all this stuff off, you're not going to be able to hear it as well. going to try to keep the volumes good for you guys. So now, what you're about to hear is direct outs only. These are going to be instruments, no EQ, no compression. There's no mastering EQ, no mastering. We're not listening to anything master yet. I'll tell you when we do. We're not listening to anything ambience-wise. No room, no reverb. So let's listen to the instruments. This is reminiscent of you listening to your samples in your module with zero processing on them. I'm not talking about modeling in this video, by the way. Here we go. So it's very dry. It's just like listening to samples in the module, except these are real drums recorded in a very small booth, and there's some bleed in there. I'm sure you can hear it. You would not normally hear that bleed in a module. So now I'm going to play that again, and I'm going to kick in the EQ. You're going to hear things tighten up, clean up. It's going to get rid of issues where there's rumble. It's going to brighten up the detail and everything. I'll tell you right before I turn it on. You'll see me turn it on right here. Here we go. With EQ. So it starts to give it some detail. It starts to bring it to life a little bit. We're now going to listen to, we're now going to kick in the compression. So same thing, direct outs only, instruments only, direct outs, and I'm going to kick in the compressor. This would be what you're sending to your front of house if you're only using direct outs, and if you're using EQ, which we just turned on, and you're going to hear some punch come in with the compressor. Here we go. With the compressor. So let me let you hear just one instrument. So now imagine you're sending your snare. Make sure I've got the right stuff on and off here. Imagine you have your snare. This is your direct out to your snare that you're sending to the engineer at a gig. You'll hear me play it through. Right after the toms, I'll kick in the EQ. When it loops, I'll kick in the compressor. And then you will have heard it with each of those turned on. Here we go. Some of that's bleed from the mic. So that's no processing. Here comes EQ. Now we're going to kick on the compressor. Here we go. So you get the idea. So now I'm going to unsolo that. Let's do that with the bass drum too, so you can hear that as well. And so same thing, direct out, totally dry, no mixing on it, or no EQ and compression. Here we go. With EQ. That could be better. With compressor. So the examples I just showed you, you can see already you have options on your direct outs of what you want to send to your engineer. I call this channel strip mixing. So in your module, if you're first of all, if you're playing a gig in a bar, regardless of the size of the bar, I personally say don't use ambience at all. You can use reverb if you want, if you cannot have it added at the front of house console by the engineer. You can use reverb, and the reverb I did here will be a perfect example of that. But I would say if you're in a room playing a bar or whatever, you don't need the ambience. You've got the room. Let the room do its job. So again, that example was your direct out. So if you want to send, kind of a punchy, powerful channel strip version, some of you may not know what I mean by that, but basically when you go into a studio, and they set your drums, or you set your drums up and then they mic them. First thing they do is they go through their preamps, they go through their EQ, they go through their compression, they give you a great sound to inspire you so that when you're playing and you're recording, you're inspired and you get, a nice performance. So if your engineer wants to mix, that's all fine and dandy. if you want to, you can come up with the perfect drum sound you want and send him that through your direct out, and then he could take it further. It kind of takes some of the job off of him and also gets you the result you want kind of halfway there or more. If you just send him dry with nothing on it, he's going to have to do whatever he wants to do, and he may not do what you like. So I always suggest, if you're going to send direct outs, do the EQ, do the compressor, hook it up to a mixer on your own time, and just do one instrument at a time, EQ it through the module, listen through, if you can, go to where you practice, listen through your PA, and use the PA as a judge to do your EQ and your comp for every single instrument. That way you have perfect, ready to go direct outs that you can give to the engineer no matter where you go, and he can control the rest based on the venue. So let's go ahead and move on. Let me explain what this is here. So here are my buses again. I have these instruments going to their buses, and as you can see, I have some sends. These are called auxiliary sends. These auxiliary sends are what we use in the recording world to send to an effect, okay? So let me use this snare for an example here. As you can see, these two have been mixed. We'll say this is a mimic. It's got its own EQ and compressor on each instrument, top and bottom here, and it's going into this. That means that it's sending to the direct out. This is why I named these direct out, because this is basically what you're listening to. If I solo this and we play it, you can see, pretend like that's the fader on the front of your module. Listen. I can turn it down. I can turn it up. So that's why I did that. So we're basically emulating that direct out with this bus and fader. But I also have this room and reverb. So why didn't we hear it? Well, it's not because it's muted. I could actually go ahead and solo the ambience as well. It's got to bring in everything. I don't want to do that. Hold on a second. Let's do, let's just do the reverb. So we could listen to it, but what I'm listening to is, if you notice, when I turn that on, it's turning this on, and I'm listening through this master here. I'll tell you in a moment why we can't do that. So here's the snare with the with the reverb. But to get that to your engineer, you would have to send your direct out snare, and you would have to send your direct out reverb. Okay, and that's fine. You can do that. If your board at a gig does not have reverb, then this is the way to do it. If your board does have reverb, again, I would go back to the previous example. Just send him a direct out with a pro EQ or with an EQ and a compressor. Let him add reverb as you desire, or as he desires, at the console. If you want to make things easy, yes, you can go just main direct outs or master outs, and we'll get to that in a few moments. So let's talk about why we can't send that back and get the sound we just heard through our direct out. The reason is this send here goes over to this reverb, and then you'll notice this reverb, I've got it going to this bus. I'm basically emulating a Roland module here, but you'll notice that's going to the master. If I were to change this, first of all, a DAW won't let you do this, but if I were to change this to where this reverb is coming back over here, you get a loop. It's going to come back in here, it's going to go back into the reverb, and you've got an endless loop of a cavernous reverb that just never ends. So how do you get around that? Well, the way you get around that is you have Roland or whoever make another master channel for you that you can send to just for every single instrument. And you basically double the price of your module. That's why they don't do it. Plus, we don't do that in the DAW world or the real recording world. We just don't do it. So everything ends up going through our master. So let's follow that signal flow for a second. Let me back up. Here's our snare. This is in the case of a mimic. And when I say mimic, this is for any module. If you just have one snare, then you just have one snare. If you have a TD50, you have layers. That part doesn't matter. But they come together into a bus that sends. Okay, so this is your direct out that goes to your direct out. It's also sending over here to our, in this case, the snare is going to both the reverb and room. And then those are going to our master out. Now, like I said, these act as direct outs too. You see these blue faders. I made them this way for a purpose, that you could send these to direct outs as well so that you can mix these. But they go to your master out. So if you want them together, they can only go to the master out together. So let's go ahead and, so we just listened to our direct outs, all instruments. I go over here. This is our direct outs. So the example I mentioned was sending the reverb if you didn't have it, or you wanted a particular reverb that's in your module. Here's what that would sound like. That's a separate direct out. You can also do that with your room. Now we've got our room. I just realized that's way too loud. Sorry, guys. So what I just emulated there is all your direct outs and sending reverb and room direct out. Now here's the problem with that. In most modules, your reverb and your room, if you want to send a room, like I said, you really shouldn't. But if you did, that's 4 channels you just took up. Most modules, not talking about the Mimic, only have 4 more channels to go, which means you have to get your bass drum, your snare, your hi-hat, your ride, your toms, and your overheads in 4 channels. Most people are going to want their cymbals alone as well, which means everything else has to go to 2 channels. At some point, you get limited as to where you can mix volumes during a gig versus where your engineer can handle that. So now you can see why I say usually just leave the ambience out, and or leave the the room out. Don't send it. You can do that for recording for DAWs. That'd be fine. You can do passes if you don't have all the inputs you need. But the point being is when you're gigging, you don't need that. Your room takes care of itself. So now we're going to listen to that as if it's going through the mains or the master outs, and we're going to turn on our EQ and compression. So just like in our instruments here, our EQ polished things up, tightened things up, gave it a little bit of headroom, or a little bit of air, a little bit of detail, a little bit of low end. And then our compressors brought in that punch and kind of started to control all the dynamics a little bit, bring some up and some down, basically bring them together a little bit better. And then we added our ambience here. Now we're going to do the same thing here on the master. We're going to turn on our EQ. Again, it's going to kind of polish the detail just a little bit, and then I'll kick on the compressor, and it's going to kind of punch that lower end. You'll hear the lower end tighten up and punch a little bit. Here we go. EQ. And with compression. You can hear the punch in the bass drum. I'll let it go back through the toms. So you get the point. That's what the mastering is set for, is designed for, so that you can do that final polish. So you want to do most of your EQ and compression on your instruments, and then your master you want to just kind of polish in the module. And you'll see me when I talk about this when I do the mixing course for the module. You'll see that I work into a mastering. I usually have some defaults I start with, and that I work into that, so that when I get to the master, that I can push it if I want. And we'll talk about that in another video. So I hope that this has explained why you can get stuff, where you can get stuff and where you can't, and why. It's all about signal flow. It's all about not looping things and making trouble. It's all about not making your module cost 3 times as much by giving everything its own master channel, which would be a whole nother problem in and of itself. But hopefully I've made this pretty clear for you to understand a little bit better the questions that you write me about. How do I get this sound here or there? What are my options? What should I be doing? I hope I answered all those questions. If I didn't, please put those questions down in the comments, and I will make sure to answer them either down there or in the upcoming videos when I do a complete session on the DAW or even on the module. I'm going to do something for the module first, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to record raw tracks and do a recording or a mix in the DAW, so that I can show you both worlds, gigging, recording. So I hope that helped. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up, subscribe while you're down there, and click the bell to be notified of upcoming videos. And don't forget to visit us over at vexpressionsltd.com. See what kind of kits we have for your module, and come talk with us over at vdrums.com, the forum over there. Lots of guys over there to answer questions. I'm on the forum every single day. If you have questions about this, you want to strike up a conversation, that's the place to do it. You can also reach our Facebook page and group through our website, theexpressionsltd.com. That does it for today. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.